Now let's talk about the technologies available to communicate signals to the CSM. There may be others available, but the four main are dial-up, IP or Internet Protocol, cellular, and radio. And just so you know, it's not unusual for people to call certain cellular technologies radio. So it's legitimate to ask if someone says they're using a radio transmitter. Do you mean RF or cellular? You'll see that it makes a difference as we go through the rest of the presentation. Dial-up technology was the industry's standard for decades. I don't think it was ever considered the best way to send signals, but it was certainly the most widely used because it was relatively cheap and reliable enough. If you sent a test signal every day, you could assume that it would likely work if there was a fire. Telephone lines at the time were pretty reliable and would stay active even in the event of a local power outage, since power came from the telephone company and not the building itself. The fire alarm DACT was designed to send alarm, supervisory, and trouble signals over copper wires on a system that was designed to connect people via voice conversation. With phone companies converting copper lines to fiber and cellular networks increasing their ability to transmit data, copper wires are quickly going the way of the dodo bird. Even if you think you have an old-style copper wire connection, chances are it only lasts until the phone switch. Then it gets converted to digital and transmitted via fiber, satellite, cellular, or some other technology. For those reasons, using a DACT as an outgoing technology. NFPA 72 says that if you use dial-up, you need to back it up with a second technology, like cellular, IP, or radio. You can only back it up with a second phone line if that's the only tech available, but it requires specific approval by the AHJ. It's usually unusual these days that you wouldn't have internet access via cellular, satellite, or something, especially if you're anywhere near a city of any size. Compared to newer technologies, dial-up is very slow and becomes more unreliable with every copper wire that is taken out and replaced with some other technology. It's unfortunate that consumers are hard-pressed to convert from their dial-up connect, but maybe because it's a cost, or they think it costs a lot, or a general lack of understanding that keeping it in place can be very dangerous. At Emergency 24, we see daily test signals that take several attempts to complete, meaning that the signal does not get through for several minutes from the first attempt. Many years ago, a colleague had a fire inspector fail his test because it took more than 90 seconds to see the alarm signal at the central station. Just to make the point of how critical time is when reporting a fire condition, he asked, "Son, you ever been on fire for 90 seconds? I'm happy to say I have not. Next up is IP communicators. IP communicators are logically the perfect technology for transmitting data. The cost of the fire alarm IP communicator is comparatively inexpensive, and transmission times are very quick. Theoretically, there are no additional recurring costs beyond having the communicator installed. If you share your connection that you already need for your computer, though, through a switch or a router, and the code allows it to be used as the sole path, as long as it meets the NFPA requirements. The downside comes from the practical nature of having reliable internet access that meets fire code. If you have a dedicated commercial grade account with a dedicated public IP address with sufficient backup power, not only does the cost savings go away, you take on additional recurring costs from your ISP. If you connect through a router and have your IP communicator sit on your local area network, now you really have a can of worms. You will save the recurring cost, and of the dedicated account, but typically smaller customers have to get their service provider involved in order to get everything set up. And larger customers usually talks to their IT department and given a quick thumbs down on the idea. Even if they do buy in, the potential to go down because some unforeseen upgrade or change in IT staff is high. NFPA states in its handbook that the communication time failure parameter was changed from 60 minutes from 5 minutes because internet providers routinely shut down service for up to 20 minutes. And meeting NFPA 72 requirements for backup power isn't easy. The 2019 version of the NFPA 72 says, in part, that the secondary power capacity for all transmitters and shared equipment necessary for the transmission of alarm, supervisory, trouble, and other signals located at the protected premises shall be a minimum of 24 hours. Before you consider using IP communicator, be sure to discuss these things with your IT folks, your internet service provider, and your CSM company. These backup requirements weren't particularly clear in the past versions of NFPA 72, so there's a lot of equipment installed that just doesn't measure up. Next, we have cellular. Cellular and IP communicators are similar, except that the cell company is your internet service provider. There are no security concerns for your IT staff to freak out over, and it is much more reliable than dial-up. It can also be used as sole path. Of course, you do have to be in range of the cell towers. There's an adequate signal requirement. Usually there's some sort of initiation fee and recurring account charges, just like with your cell phone. Not usually at the cost as costly as your cell phone accounts, but often based on the amount of data you transmit. Usually that is managed by your dialer manufacturer through your CSM provider. The backup power listed here as a disadvantage is due to the cell tower backup. The building code has no authority over public utilities, so they require 24 hours at the protected premises and at the central station. That does not help the actual transmission medium. If you Google it, you'll see that 2 to 4 hours is typical. I'm sure many have generators and city coverage is probably better than rural, but it does make me pause when using it for fire alarm communications. One more disruptive thing to cellular communications is the fact that the technology is moving so fast, and when new ones come out, the old one is destined to die. And its hardware needs to be replaced. The last article I read about 4G LTE said that it should be around for at least 10 years. That was published in 2020. We'll see.
And we have a question about that, Jonathan. Could they change that at any time? Could they decide in 6 months we need to change to 5G?
It's going to be a little more planned out than that. You know what I mean? When the 6G comes out, we saw that we just have seen this rollout, and so they were getting rid of 2G and 3G and a little bit of the 4G. It depends how they lump that 4G in. So we generally have a notice of it, but then it's, there's like a big run because no one ever gets ahead of it. So you're always chasing the technology. So, and then you're once it gets like shut off, it's a brick, it's a paperweight, you throw it in the garbage. Okay. So you'll get a bit of a notice, at the most, 2 years, but it might just be a year or 6 months. And then now, did you include that in your budgets?
Thank you.
You're welcome. We saved the best for last. Let's polish off the tech part of the presentation with the AES radio network. If it looks like the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, they do. First, each subscriber unit has up to 8 paths to communicate between the protected premises and the IP links, where it is passed on to the CSM. In order to be acceptable for Fire, you must have at least 2 validated paths. The network is described as self-healing. As you add or subtract subscribers, each one will dynamically resample the strength of the signal to the radios around it and log the best 8. Alarms are transmitted to the CSM within 1 to 3 seconds. That's as fast as it gets. There are no individual cellular or internet service provider expenses. Each network shares these connections through the use of IP links and hybrid subscribers. Each IP link provides 2 IP connections, and each hybrid adds 1 more. PSI's Portland network, for instance, has 4 IP links and 8 hybrid radios. And although it's not required, we make a point to use different providers scattered throughout the network to ensure we don't rely heavily on one ISP. One of the more important strengths of our AES network is that we manage it. There's no reliance on public utilities. When we do periodic maintenance, the system remains 100% up and available. AES has been making this product for about 4 decades, have never changed the basic communication format. All radios from first gen will sit on the network with a new one, meaning that there's no technology sunset like we've seen over and over with cellular providers. The only disadvantage is that you do have to be within the radio network geography to where you can have at least 2 validated pathways. But that's exactly what the hybrid radio does for a living. It allows us to expand outward from the metropolitan areas into the more rural parts. Right here you can see Oregon. And so I believe that's Eugene, Salem, and Portland, obviously being the most dense. And then on your upper right-hand side, you do see how many cool connections we have for our Portland area and Vancouver. Don't want to forget Vancouver. So we can get you pretty good coverage over in that area. Okay. Now here's Washington area. You'll see we've just started to move in towards Mount Vernon. And we're expanding our Tacoma network right now, and we're in DuPont. And then we're actively working right now on filling in between Tacoma and South Seattle. And we're now creating a new network in the Bay Area in California, specifically starting out in like the Mountain View area. We've got some great people behind that, so I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with the new offerings available in that area.